Her hands trembled as she slipped the canister of baby formula under her worn hoodie. Aurora's heart pounded against her ribs as she moved through the discount grocery store, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. At 19, she'd become an expert at survival, but today felt different. Today, desperation had pushed her to the breaking point. Have you ever been so desperate that you'd risk everything for someone you love? That moment when hunger becomes stronger than fear, when protecting your family means crossing lines you never thought you'd cross. That's exactly where Aurora found herself on this cold November afternoon in Chicago. But she had no idea that the man in the expensive overcoat watching her every move wasn't just any witness. He was Elias Thornfield, CEO of a $12 billion pharmaceutical empire, the same company whose formula she was stealing. When security grabbed her arm and she locked eyes with this stranger, 7 words escaped her lips. What she whispered next would destroy a billionaire's world forever. But before we reveal those 7 words that changed everything, smash that like button if you've ever wondered what happens when the past comes back to haunt you. To understand how Elias Thornfield became the kind of man who could abandon his own child, we need to go back to where it all started, the rust-stained streets of Gary, Indiana. Born to a factory welder and a school cafeteria worker, Elias grew up surrounded by the acrid smell of steel mills and the constant fear of not having enough. His childhood was defined by hand-me-down clothes, government cheese, and watching his parents argue over electric bills they couldn't afford to pay. But it was his older brother Tommy's death at 22 from an opioid overdose that truly shaped the man Elias would become. While most people would let grief soften them, Elias let it harden him like steel. He made a vow over Tommy's grave he would never be vulnerable again, never be poor again, never let anyone or anything control his destiny. Scholarships became his escape route. Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management didn't just give him an education, it gave him a weapon. He learned to see human need not as suffering to be relieved, but as opportunity to be exploited. While his classmates networked at parties, Elias studied market analytics until his eyes burned. While they dated and built relationships, he built spreadsheets and financial models. By 1998, he'd transformed Vitalis Nutrition from a struggling vitamin supplier into a pharmaceutical powerhouse. His breakthrough came when he capitalized on loosened FDA regulations for infant formula additives. Other executives saw red tape. Elias saw revenue streams. Hunger isn't a crisis, it's a market opportunity, he famously declared at a 2017 shareholders meeting. The room fell silent as he defended Vitalis's 30% price hike during a supply chain disruption. Babies were going hungry, families were choosing between formula and rent. But Elias saw only numbers on a balance sheet. And the strategy worked brilliantly. Vitalis now controlled 41% of the US formula market. Stock prices tripled after he acquired 3 competitors during the 2022 shortage. While desperate parents stood in long lines at pharmacies, Elias's net worth soared past $12 billion. But success demanded sacrifices. Elias never called them that. He called them strategic decisions. When his wife begged him to come home for their son's baseball game, he stayed for a board meeting instead. When she asked him to take a real vacation, not a business trip disguised as family time, he cited quarterly projections. When she finally broke down crying at their anniversary dinner, explaining how lonely she felt in their own marriage, he offered to hire her a personal assistant to manage her schedule better. "You'd sell your soul for a quarterly report," she accused him during their divorce proceedings in 2005. She wasn't wrong, he just didn't see why that was a bad thing. Their 2 sons moved with her to Geneva. Elias told himself it was better this way. Fewer distractions from building his empire. He reduced his relationship with his children to monthly wire transfers and birthday cards signed by his secretary. Everything became a transaction to Elias. Love was a liability. Family was overhead. Emotions were inefficiencies that needed to be eliminated from the equation. His empire grew stronger while his humanity grew weaker. He surrounded himself with yes men who praised his vision and board members who applauded his ruthlessness. At industry conferences, competitors called him the Ice King of Infant Nutrition, a nickname he wore like a badge of honor. The penthouse suite, the private jets, the art collection worth $75 million. These weren't just symbols of success to Elias. They were proof that he'd won. Proof that the scared little boy from Gary, Indiana was dead and buried. He'd built the perfect life according to his calculations. Every decision optimized for maximum profit. Every relationship evaluated for its return on investment. Every choice filtered through the cold logic of market dominance. But every empire has cracks, and Elias's foundation was about to crumble under the weight of a truth he'd spent 30 years trying to bury. The winter of 2005 brought more than just snow to Elias's carefully ordered world. It brought Clara Nyan. At 24, Clara was everything Elias thought he'd eliminated from his life: passionate, idealistic, and dangerously brilliant. Fresh from Loyola University with a biochemistry degree, she'd been assigned to his corporate lab as an intern. While other employees kept their heads down and followed protocols, Clara asked questions that made Elias think. Her research on lipid profiles in breast milk substitutes was groundbreaking. She'd discovered a way to enhance nutrient absorption that could revolutionize infant formula, work that would later become Vitalis's patented Bionish formula worth millions. But it wasn't just her mind that captivated Elias. For the first time in years, he found himself staying late at the office, not for board meetings, but to watch Clara work. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. How her eyes lit up when discussing molecular structures. The soft laugh that escaped when she realized he'd been watching her. Their affair began carefully, hidden behind the facade of professional mentorship. Clandestine dinners at Alinea where they talked for hours about everything except work. Weekend escapes to Lake Geneva where Elias showed Clara a gentleness no one at Vitalis had ever seen. For 6 months, Clara became his secret addiction. She made him remember what it felt like to be human, instead of just a profit machine. In her tiny apartment, surrounded by scientific journals and takeout containers, Elias experienced something he'd forgotten existed: genuine connection. Clara believed in him, not in his money or his empire, but in the man she glimpsed during those stolen moments. She saw past the cold CEO facade to the boy from Gary who'd once had dreams beyond dollar signs. "You could change the world, Elias," she whispered one night as they lay together. "Not just dominate it, actually make it better." Then came the pregnancy test. 2 pink lines that shattered Elias's carefully constructed fantasy. Clara was glowing when she showed him, her hands trembling with excitement and fear. "I know we didn't plan this, but maybe." "A child doesn't fit into the timeline." Elias cut her off, his voice already returning to boardroom coldness. The Vitalis IPO was scheduled for the following year. A scandal involving an affair with an intern would destroy everything he'd worked for. He reached for his checkbook, the solution he used for every problem. "This covers everything. Medical expenses, relocation costs, whatever you need to handle this situation." The light died in Clara's eyes as she stared at the check. "Handle this situation? You mean our baby?" "It's a complication that needs to be resolved," he replied, already mentally calculating the financial impact. Nothing more. Clara's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked at him with a mixture of heartbreak and disgust that cut deeper than any insult. "I thought I knew you," she whispered. "I thought what we had was real." 3 weeks later, Clara submitted her resignation letter. No explanation, no forwarding address. Just a formal goodbye that felt like ice water in Elias's veins. Along with it, she left the positive pregnancy test on his desk. a reminder of what he'd chosen to throw away. Drop a comment below if you think Clara should have taken that check, or if she was right to disappear. Clara disappeared into the forgotten corners of East St. Louis, where hope goes to die and dreams rot like garbage in abandoned lots. Her grandmother's duplex sat on a street where gunshots punctuated lullabies and sirens provided the only soundtrack to childhood. The house itself was a monument to decay. Roaches scuttled across cracked linoleum floors while the ancient furnace wheezed through Missouri winters, providing just enough heat to keep pipes from freezing. Peeling wallpaper hung like dead skin from water-damaged walls, and the bathroom ceiling leaked brown stains that Clara stared at for hours during her darkest moments. Postpartum depression hit Clara like a freight train she never saw coming. Some days she'd sit motionless at the kitchen table, staring at baby Aurora, as if trying to remember who this tiny stranger was. Other days, she'd scream at phantom voices only she could hear, accusing neighbors of plotting against her through the thin walls. The shame of unmarried motherhood in her traditional Vietnamese-American community isolated her further. Family members whispered behind closed doors about Clara's mistake, their judgment cutting deeper than poverty ever could. Phone calls home became rare, then stopped altogether. Aurora's earliest memories were soaked in sour milk and desperation. By age 5, she understood that the empty formula cans stacked in their kitchen weren't toys. They were monuments to survival. When other kids talked about happy meals and birthday parties, Aurora learned to count pennies and stretch meals. At 8 years old, she'd mastered the art of making one can of Vitalis Gentle Care last 3 days instead of 2. The $35 price tag might as well have been $300 in their world. Aurora would water down the formula until it looked more like skim milk, telling herself that something was better than nothing for baby Liam. Clara's mental health continued its downward trajectory. She'd disappear for days, leaving Aurora to care for her baby brother with nothing but expired coupons and food stamps that never seemed to stretch far enough. By the time Aurora turned 14, she'd become the adult in their broken household. That's when she discovered Clara had been selling their SNAP benefits for cash, trading food security for antidepressants she couldn't afford. Aurora found the receipts hidden in Clara's bedroom, $40 in grocery benefits sold for $20 in cash, over and over again. The breaking point came during the 2022 formula shortage, when supply chain disruptions hit low-income communities like a sledgehammer to the skull. Store shelves that had always been barely stocked now sat completely empty. The formula that had cost $35 was suddenly $60 when you could find it at all. 16-year-old Aurora spent nights cycling between 24-hour pharmacies, her backpack heavy with stolen diapers and whatever baby supplies she could slip past security cameras. She'd memorized the schedules of every CVS and Walgreens within biking distance, timing her visits to avoid the same cashiers. They'd locked the formula behind glass like jewelry, Aurora would later recall, her voice breaking with the memory. As if we were criminals for needing to feed our babies. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same company that made it impossible for families like hers to afford basic nutrition had a CEO living in luxury she couldn't even comprehend. One February morning in 2023, Aurora returned from another midnight pharmacy run to find the duplex eerily quiet. No crying baby, no muttering from Clara's bedroom, just the sound of wind rattling broken window frames. She found the note on the kitchen table, written in Clara's increasingly erratic handwriting. The voices won't stop. They're telling me I'm poison to you both. Maybe they're right. Take care of Liam. Be better than I could be. Next to the note sat a half-empty bottle of vodka and the last family photo they'd taken together, Aurora holding baby Liam while Clara smiled a smile that never reached her eyes. Clara was gone. No forwarding address, no phone number, just abandonment disguised as mercy. At 17, Aurora became a mother to her 2-year-old brother and an orphan on the same day. The East St. Louis Gazette obituary would later read, Clara Nyan, 42, died of complications from malnutrition. But Aurora knew the truth. Her mother had died years earlier, slowly consumed by poverty, shame, and a system designed to break people like them. While Aurora was learning to steal to survive, her father was celebrating record profits from the very formula she couldn't afford to buy. Elias hadn't planned to visit the Save Mart on South Pulaski Road that November afternoon. His driver typically handled shopping at Whole Foods, but a cancelled board meeting left him restless and oddly curious about the real world his marketing team kept referencing in focus groups. The moment he stepped through the automatic doors, he felt like an alien visiting another planet. His $5,000 Ermenegildo Zegna overcoat stood out like a beacon among the frayed winter jackets and second-hand sweaters. Shopping carts squeaked with broken wheels while fluorescent bulbs hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh, unflattering light. He watched families counting coupons at self-checkout stations, mothers apologizing to cashiers for putting items back, children tugging on sleeves asking for snacks they couldn't afford. This was the America that bought his products, the America he'd never bothered to meet. Then he saw her. Near the baby formula aisle stood a girl who looked barely out of her teens, her hollow cheeks speaking of too many missed meals. She wore a threadbare hoodie that had seen better years, and her hands trembled as she reached for a canister of Vitalis Gentle Care. The same formula that had made him billions. Something about her desperation made Elias pause. He'd seen desperation before in boardrooms, but this was different. Raw, primal. The kind of desperation that came from watching someone you love slowly starve. The girl's movements were practiced, methodical. She'd done this before. As she slipped the $38 canister under her hoodie, her eyes darted around the store like a cornered animal seeking escape routes. Elias found himself frozen, watching this tragedy unfold in real time. Part of him wanted to look away, to retreat to his comfortable world where poverty was just a statistic in market research. But something held him there, maybe guilt, maybe curiosity, maybe the ghost of his own hungry childhood. The security guard appeared like a hawk swooping on prey. His hand clamped down on the girl's thin shoulder, just as she tried to walk toward the exit. "Please," she begged, and the desperation in her voice cut through Elias like a blade. "My brother's starving. He's only 2 years old. I'll bring the money tomorrow, I swear." The guard wasn't interested in promises. As he yanked her arm, forcing her to reveal the stolen formula, the girl's hoodie fell back from her face. Time seemed to slow as Elias got his first clear look at her features. Those almond-shaped eyes, so familiar they made his chest tighten. The curve of her cheekbones, the stubborn set of her jaw when cornered. Clara's face stared back at him across 18 years of willful ignorance. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. His knees nearly buckled as fragments of memory crashed together. Clara's smile in the lab, the pregnancy test left on his desk, the resignation letter he'd thrown away without a second thought. The girl, his daughter, locked eyes with him across the store. In that moment, surrounded by discount groceries and security cameras, two worlds collided with devastating force. Her lips moved, forming words that would haunt him forever. 7 words whispered with the quiet fury of someone who'd lost everything. "Your formula killed my mother, Daddy." The words hit harder than any hostile takeover, any stock market crash, any business failure he'd ever endured. They cut through 30 years of carefully constructed walls and exposed the rotten foundation beneath his empire. Elias felt his legs give out. The billionaire CEO who commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors crumpled against a display of discounted cereal, his world collapsing in aisle 7 of a discount grocery store. Security cameras captured it all, The moment when the past finally caught up with a man who thought money could buy him immunity from consequences. The moment when Aurora Nyan, daughter of poverty and abandonment, looked her father in the eye and destroyed him with the truth. Guys, I need you to pause and think about being in Elias's shoes right now. What would you do? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this. The DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Elias's life into before and after. 99.98% probability of paternity, scientific certainty wrapped in legal letterhead that made his hands shake as he read. His team of lawyers descended like vultures, their expensive suits and cold calculations filling his penthouse conference room. Denny everything, urged his lead counsel, challenge the test, question her motives. We can make this disappear. But Elias wasn't listening. He was staring at Clara's obituary, finally retrieved from the East St. Louis Gazette archives, a death notice he'd ignored when it first appeared in 2023. Clara Nengyan, 42, died of complications from malnutrition. 4 words that destroyed him: complications from malnutrition. While he'd been adding billions to his net worth, the mother of his child had literally starved to death in one of the richest countries on earth. The lawyers kept talking about damage control and non-disclosure agreements, but their voices faded into background noise. All Elias could hear was Aurora's whisper echoing in his mind, "Your formula killed my mother, Daddy." Aurora didn't wait for Elias to find his conscience. 3 days after their encounter, she walked into the Chicago Tribune newsroom with a story that would make front-page headlines across the nation. Her testimony was devastating in its simplicity. No corporate jargon, no financial euphemisms, just the raw truth of what Vitalis Nutrition had done to families like hers. They made billions while moms like mine chose between feeding us and feeding themselves, Aurora told the reporter, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. My mother died because she gave us her food. She gave us everything, including her life. The investigation that followed exposed a web of corporate cruelty that made even seasoned journalists recoil. Vitalis had been systematically price gouging low-income neighborhoods for years. The same canister of formula that cost $26.99 in Elias's Gold Coast neighborhood was priced at $38.99 in East St. Louis. A 45% markup targeting the families who could least afford it. But the price manipulation was just the beginning. Internal documents revealed that Vitalis had knowingly distributed contaminated batches to WIC programs while sending clean products to premium retailers. Poor families weren't just paying more, they were getting inferior, potentially dangerous formula for their babies. The lobbying records told an even darker story. While Aurora's family struggled to afford basic nutrition, Vitalis had spent millions fighting Medicaid expansion and opposing food assistance programs. They'd literally paid politicians to keep families hungry, ensuring a captive market for their overpriced products. Aurora's exposed triggered a federal investigation that would eventually uncover decades of systematic exploitation. But for Elias, the most damning evidence wasn't found in corporate emails or financial records. It was in Clara's recovered journal, pages stained with tears and desperation. Entry after entry documented her struggles, rationing formula until Aurora cried from hunger, selling her own blood plasma to buy baby food, choosing between heating the apartment and feeding her children. The final entry, dated just weeks before her death, was barely legible. I failed them both. Aurora deserves better than a mother who can't even keep food on the table. Maybe they'll be better off without me. As Aurora's story spread across social media, Justice for Aurora began trending nationwide. Suddenly, the girl who'd been invisible to society had a voice that couldn't be silenced. And that voice was demanding more than just acknowledgement. It was demanding justice for every family that had suffered while executives like her father profited from their pain. The collapse happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within 48 hours of Aurora's Tribune interview, justice for Aurora exploded across every social media platform. Mothers shared their own stories of choosing between rent and baby formula. Fathers posted photos of empty pharmacy shelves alongside screenshots of Vitalis's record profits. The stock market responded with brutal efficiency. Vitalis Nutrition shares plummeted 60% overnight, wiping out $8 billion in market value. Pension funds, hedge funds, and retail investors all fled simultaneously, creating a financial avalanche that buried decades of carefully constructed wealth. Criminal negligence charges followed within the week. Federal prosecutors had built an airtight case using Aurora's testimony and the company's own internal documents. The charges were as serious as they were numerous: consumer fraud, racketeering, and willful endangerment of public health. Elias's lawyers demanded he fight the charges, but something had broken inside him during that moment in aisle 7. The man who'd once viewed every crisis as a negotiation opportunity now sat in his penthouse, staring at Clara's obituary and feeling the weight of 30 years' worth of consequences. His $75 million art collection became the first casualty of his awakening conscience. Picasso's, Manet's, and Rothko's, trophies of his success, were quietly auctioned to fund class action settlements. The Basquiat that had hung in his office, worth $12 million alone, now paid for formula supplies to thousands of families. But Aurora wanted more than money. When they finally met face to face in a downtown law office, she made her demands clear. "I don't want your guilt money. I want your power." She insisted on a seat on Vitalis's board of directors, not as a token gesture, but as an active advocate for ethical pricing and transparent business practices. The woman who'd once stolen formula to survive now had the authority to prevent other families from facing the same desperation. Their first Thanksgiving together was awkward beyond description. Elias, who'd never cooked a meal in his adult life, attempted to prepare turkey in his pristine kitchen. The result was burnt on the outside, raw in the middle, a perfect metaphor for their relationship. Aurora fed 2-year-old Liam with a bottle while Elias fumbled with cranberry sauce, both of them navigating this strange new reality where billionaire and abandoned daughter tried to become something resembling family. The moment that broke through his remaining walls came when Aurora handed him Clara's recovered journal. Between water-stained pages filled with desperation and love, he found a sketch Clara had drawn in 2005, a portrait of himself, labeled in her careful handwriting, "The man who could have loved us." 30 years too late. Elias finally understood what he'd thrown away for quarterly profits and shareholder approval. Aurora's lawsuit became the catalyst for change that politicians had avoided for decades. The Infant Nutrition Reform Act of 2025 passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, capping formula prices at 150% of production costs nationwide. No longer could companies like Vitalis exploit desperate families with predatory pricing. Under Aurora's leadership, Vitalis launched Clara's Promise, a program providing free organic formula to low-income families through community health centers. The same company that had once profited from poverty now partnered with urban farms and food banks, distributing supplies that had Clara's photo on every package. The transformation in Elias was as dramatic as it was genuine. Every Sunday morning he'd push 2-year-old Liam's stroller through the same Save Mart where his world had collapsed. His Armani suits were replaced by jeans and sneakers. His platinum credit cards stayed home while he carefully counted coupons like the families he'd once dismissed. These weren't photo opportunities or public relations stunts. They were lessons in humility that money couldn't buy. Watching other parents stretch their grocery budgets, seeing elderly customers put items back at checkout, understanding the weight of every dollar when survival hung in the balance. Aurora remained cautious with her affection, but she allowed these moments of connection. Sometimes she'd join them, teaching Elias how to make Liam laugh or showing him which generic brands offered the best value. These Sunday afternoons became sacred, two broken people learning to trust each other again. The nightmares still came. Elias would wake at 3 a.m., Clara's voice echoing through his penthouse, accusations, pleas, and final goodbyes he'd never bothered to hear when she was alive. Therapy helped, but some wounds only time could heal. Last week, as they sat in Aurora's modest apartment watching Liam play with his toys, she offered him wisdom beyond her 20 years. Maybe we can be better than the worst thing we've done. In that moment, surrounded by second-hand furniture and genuine love, Elias finally understood what wealth really meant. Not the number in his bank account, but the family he'd almost lost forever. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember to subscribe because stories like Aurora's need to be told. What lesson did you take from this? Drop it in the comments below.